Helen reached into her pocket while using the elbow to hold the steering wheel in a frontwards direction. Not that it would have mattered that much, as the vehicle had not moved for around 20 minutes, nor would looking at the map on her phone, which indicated a solid red line, meaning that this situation, coupled with the storm, meant she was not going anywhere soon. 1 hour ago, hurry was the last thing on her mind. Towing, accompanied with a modicum of froing, had taken hold of her life and were not letting go. She was like a spectator viewing from the sidelines as everything began to crack around her. Every day the cracks got bigger. Every day she simply moved the picture frame a little to the left or to right and got on with her day. The night before she was close. She so nearly told him. She wanted to tell him about the affair. She knew he knew, but she also knew that he needed it to come from her. Whether that would heal everything was another matter, but the silence lingered and penetrated every pore of their being, so that words began to hurt when it was broken. Instead, she lay in silence, locked in an unvoiced competition to see who could fall asleep last, in some way gaining a moral victory so that this nonsense could continue another day. When she heard the noise that confirmed his defeat, she allowed her left leg to gently brush his right, as if to brag about her glory. Knowing there was no point remaining awake, she fell asleep. She was quite pleased with herself with last night's antics when she woke up. He had left well before 7 without making a single sound, or without her hearing one, as she pottered about the house and suddenly realized the size of the place. Perhaps more accurately, she realized how little space she occupied of it on her own. She wondered if the cupboards had reproduced overnight simply to mock her. She wondered what would happen if she had a fall, or a heart attack, or someone came in and attacked her. What would become of her? He would rush down the stairs to her aid. He would do that heart massage thing he learned on the course. He would make her better. By this time in her life, she had reduced the term he to simply him. The other he was no more. She hadn't killed him, largely due to the existence of the criminal justice system, but it was a part of her life that was over. However, the thief and killer may never rob or murder again, but the name sticks. In an age where everything is nicely compartmentalized, everyone has a means of identifying themselves. The term adulteress still carries the same weight, and still easily exceeds the ill will resulting from its male counterpart. She rehearsed her speech. I was tricked. It's not like me and you were in a great place. I was confused. You were spending so much time with Barbara at work, and every time she tried to put the words together that would lead him to offer forgiveness, she realized she was basically issuing culpability on his part. The sense of victory began to wane. During a row of silence, she had removed all the mirrors in the house, except one, for him to shave. She did not want to see herself. She also figured that the less time she spent on her appearance, the less likely that another admirer would get in her way. Would she be able to resist? She had proven that she was incapable of fidelity. For all she knew, she could have been a serial adulteress, flitting from lover to bedpost, only to return to comforting silences and reheated beans on toast after a hard day at the office. She felt the rumbling of an imperious need to make things right. Would some extravagant gesture make things better? Brian was conservative with a small c. He still mentions the time she turned up at his work because she had mislaid her house keys. He would have preferred her to remain steadfastly British in this regard and wait on the doorstep until he arrived back, risking pneumonia while stoically not causing a fuss. She would do it the way her mother would have done. A nice meal, 2 bottles of wine, and a drink for him too, and cards on the table. What could go wrong? Basically everything from the minute she left the office. Today was her on-site day this week. She could have changed it to tomorrow or even made a flimsy excuse for not going. She had the tools in her briefcase to do her work on the top of Kilimanjaro. Signal provided, but in she went. They must have been delighted by her presence, as no sooner had she set foot through the office door, she was already announcing plans to depart. She had a line she used which she thought was hilarious for these situations. If you need me, don't need me. More recently she had begun to envisage scenarios in which they did not need her, or needed her less, or needed somebody cheaper, or less sarcastic, or who didn't sleep with a general manager who had to be shipped out to the Hong Kong office before a scandal broke at the shareholders meeting. She put this on her list of things to improve once she sorted out the Brian situation. She had an Excel spreadsheet with the Brian situation, a series of possible outcomes. Tonight she would know, though had a hunch cell B13 would be taking the plaudits. Her office was closer to Waitrose, which meant that even if things did not work out the way she had hoped, the fare would be of a suitable Last Supper standard. She wanted to get home before him, not an easy task at the present time given the scant communication between them. She wanted time to find the candles. She wanted time to rehearse her speech, and for that she needed the corkscrew. As she turned out of Waitrose, she found herself behind a paint lorry. She made a futile attempt to sneak out to the right and catch a glimpse of the oncoming traffic, only to be greeted by a flash of headlights indicating her actions to be folly. It would be another 3.5 miles to the motorway and then just 2 junctions before she would be almost home. She wanted to know his whereabouts, and most importantly when he would be home. Yet at the same time, She did want him to know she wanted to know, and if he knew, he would quite likely stay late at the office, or go and play squash with Josh. She deliberately called it tennis with Dennis to annoy him before all this. How she longed for them to have arguments that meaningless again. She just sent a text, got dinner. She pressed send and wondered if an X or 3 would have been fitting. They were not 14, but at the same time, they were not 80. She had now memorized the phone number of the paint firm. She was now making pacts with invisible gods. If this worked out, she would contract them to paint something. What needed painting? She wondered and realized she could not even envisage the state of the walls. She imagined the colors of the paints inside. She tried to imagine her house painted a series of bizarre colors. They were not moving. She had been stuck in traffic for nearly 20 minutes. The ice cream was starting to melt with the heating on full blast. Her mind continued to wander faster than the traffic. It was a stinker of an autumn day, one that made you wonder why they bothered with that season half the time, as the majority of the dinners were plain winter. She imagined her car along a coastal road, somewhere she couldn't spell. It looked like the Italian coast. Nasty corners giving way to stunning views over the Adriatic. Reaching their sumptuous villa at the top of the hill before the pizza got colder than the spumant that they would wash it down with. Of course, he would have to forgive her, accept the reset and take time off to go on holiday. He probably wouldn't choose Italy anyway, and if it was his reconciliation, then why should she choose? They would probably end up hiking in the Lake District on a day worse than this. He would make her suffer. Every ghastly moment of the so-called holiday would serve to remind her of her acts. If he forgave her, she sent another text which said stuck in traffic. She was a trifle miffed that neither had been deemed worthy of a response, though communication had not been a strong point. She remembered to keep her mind on the vehicle and its pedals. In her mind the food looked so delicious that he would have been a fool not to forgive her. Now she saw the sorry-looking lettuce traipsing outside the bag and wondered if it was not one disappointing culinary experience too late. The paint lorry decided to take her mind away from this concern. She had not noticed that there were drums of paint. For a moment she became flustered, wondering if that was the correct word, that were not properly fastened. Only now was it going fast enough for this to be noticeable. One of those falling on her bonnet would certainly not expedite the peacemaking process. She decided it might be a good idea to leave some space between her and the lorry to give her time to react if one fell. Even though she was largely sure her reaction would be simply astonishment as she watched the drum fall on her car. Her foolproof technique came unstuck when a car approaching from the left took advantage of the space to try and sneak in, causing her to brake and the car behind her to honk its horn in the most utter disgust. The kerfuffle meant the lorry driver, who was unable to see what was going on, to wonder whether he was the reason for the mayhem and applied the brakes a little too firmly. The drum fell onto the car that had seized the moment, causing its contents to open and cover the front of Helen's car. She started laughing and opened the ice cream, dipping a finger in. While they waited for law enforcement agents and the insurance companies to resolve matters, she wiped the ice cream from her face. She mouthed to herself in the mirror, today could not get any worse. Even if I get home, he'll probably tell me he's marrying his business partner, Alan. Did she deserve this? She asked herself. Then Brian called her. How gracious of him, she thought while making an effort to ensure that remained part of her inner dialogue. The voice on the other end was not Brian. Mrs. Johnson, it asked. Despite knowing that when somebody phones you with your husband's mobile and asks for you in the Mrs. form, they are not about to tell you that he has been nominated for the Nobel Prize. Helen simply responded she was. Was she in his phone as Mrs. Johnson? That would be the ultimate insult. She was experiencing random thoughts without taking in any of what the other person was saying. Mrs. Johnson, there has been a terrible fire at the laboratories, and an explosion. Your husband and the other staff did not survive. I am so sorry. Are you home? She simply hung up and sat back in the car, dipping a finger back into the ice cream, which was now runny, and chose one of his CDs at random. She did not even hear the police officer knocking on her window. 1 year to the day, Helen left Waitrose with exactly the same produce. She had kept the receipt, a little frayed around the edges, and promised she would scan it when she got home. The journey home took place without incident, and she prepared a splendid repast for her husband, who would be through the door any minute now. She poured 2 glasses of Chablis for them. 2 years to the day, Helen left Waitrose with exactly the same produce. She folded away the scan of the receipt and put it back in her purse. The journey home took place without incident, and she prepared a splendid repast for her husband, who would be through the door any minute now. She poured 2 glasses of Chablis for them. 3 years to the day, Helen left Waitrose with exactly the same produce. She had added a plastic coating to the scan to protect it and placed it back in her purse. The journey home took place without incident, and she prepared a splendid repast for her husband, who would be through the door any minute now. She poured 2 glasses of Chablis for them. 4 years to the day, Helen left Waitrose with exactly the same produce. Her new glasses could access documents from her files. She closed the scan of the receipt and returned to normal viewing mode. The journey home took place without incident, and she prepared a splendid repast for her husband, who would be through the door any minute now. She poured 2 glasses of Chablis for them. 10 years to the day, Malcolm and the twins looked at Helen and prepared to give her space. They were her new life. but part of her old life still demanded celebration. They took their meals to the games room and watched cartoons, while Helen prepared the meal she made every year on this day, and poured 2 glasses of wine, the latter part becoming an ever more expensive detail as she insisted on a 2023 vintage. 20 years to the day, the kids no longer understood the ritual, but every year she would attempt to recreate it. Waitrose no longer existed. For one terrible moment, she thought she had lost the scan. Every year it was harder to recreate the scene. Some of the products had now been banned following discoveries of links to COVID-32 and Ebola 41, but the 4D printers could be used to create almost any contraband product, if you were prepared to risk losing leisure credits. Government employees who worked in any science capacity were logged onto the system with a chip. Any alcohol imbibed would immediately be flagged and give rise to disciplinary proceedings. Nobody drank anymore. Nobody needed to. If you were desperate, you could just plug into a 7 pints of Stella and kebab night out with your AI leisure station. Take it off and never suffer the hangover. Real experiences hurt. 30 years to the day, Helen came home empty-handed. Malcolm looked at her but said nothing. The kids, now older than her when Brian died, had long gone and were only rare visitors. Helen felt like it was some kind of betrayal not cooking the meal, yet simply produced an air leaflet advertising a company called A Last Day. I can tell him myself, she told Malcolm, who in his own way would also like to say a few things to this Brian. And then we can maybe get on with what is left of our lives, he said. He had tiptoed round the issue for a decade. Then he just nodded. Then he actively ignored it. Now was the time to draw it to a close. You have never understood. But yes, it will be the end. There have been a million companies like Your Last Day, all of them shysters. Why would this be any different? It's 2053. Why do you talk like you are from the 16th century at times? And it's A Last Day and I know that he will never know. But I need to do it. That is what they feed on. Decades of pent-up grief. How much would it even cost? It's not cheap, and we are not millionaires. To use an outdated expression, I have my own funds. This discussion is over. This was a discussion? Well, that is news to me. Malcolm left her and she activated the air leaflet on the nearest infoport and watched the announcement. There was very little to argue against Malcolm's case from the sickly sweet spiel the company put forward. She had tried other methods. Regression therapy. Hypnosis. This stuff was not in its infancy now. The experiences may not be real. Indeed, many claim to be better than real. Like real was something to aim for. Real could be attained and surpassed. Why settle for real was actually one of the taglines. Humans being now incapable of creating genuine experiences without the aid of machines. Common sense suggested Malcolm was right. That was what pushed her over the edge, at least into the area of making enquiries. It would require the entirety of her savings, and a cherry on top. She had hoped it would just be a question of a few hundred post-COVID bonds. PCBs. That would not be missed. Then she could get it over with and be happy. She was only 58. She was born in 1995 to parents who forced the year of her birth's music upon her in their provincial northern town until she was old enough to leave home. 58 now was not the same as 58 when Brian died. And 58 when Brian died was not the same as when her own father died at the same age as a result of his allergy, not medically accepted, to vegetables. She was technically 40. So was Malcolm. This was the real reset. If she could focus on her work for once, she might be able to increase her revenue and opt for some of the current health treatments en vogue. She particularly liked the idea of organ filing, which removed unwanted or overly aged layers from organs to stimulate growth of stronger and healthier underlayers, or skin replacement, which effectively ended the aging process as a visual switch. Of course, if you paint an old car, under the bonnet the same story still chugs away. As she put her device down, she realized straight away that she had been searching for this information without her Desi cloak, and Malcolm would either be able to find out in no time, or be targeted with ads for the company. Secrecy was becoming harder and harder to master. Do it, he messaged her. He knew it would only mean another however many years they had left if she didn't. Algernon River Sandal formed A Last Day in the early 40s, inspired by stories of people who survived the war and who never got to tell their loved ones how much they meant to them before the planes were shot down, or before the bomb fell on their shelter, or before someone from an insignificant village in Schleswig-Holstein took the life of someone from an insignificant village in Cumberland. Of course, Algernon was also inspired by the fame and fortune a successful project would bring with it, but Healing of Hearts line worked well for investors. When he first had the idea, the technology on hand in the mid-2030s made the project as feasible as releasing Sgt. Pepper's only on MP3 format in 1967. He had two options: develop the technology himself. By that we mean pay for it, or wait for it to be developed while hoping nobody snaffled his idea. Of course, the second wave of VR technology rolled out as a means of combating the final COVID wave in 2039 meant that people could not just WFH, they could take the government's advice and LFH, live from home, being able to enjoy realistic family holidays at a distance of 2 meters from another human being. provided you could afford it. If not, you got to sweat out the virus and cross your fingers in one of the decreasingly common public health centers. The downside of LFH was that if you gave people the imaginary world they had always dreamed of, why would they ever want to leave it? Inside their helmets they drove Formula One cars, scored the winner in extra time in the World Cup final and dated supermodels. With the helmet in the box, reality was anything but virtual. It was frighteningly real. The long-term effects of LFH would be seen over the 40s, with the top belt block countries. To save you the history lesson, everywhere that adhered to US policy, forced to implement measures to limit people's exposure to VR and AI-generated experiences. Bars were filled with people in single booths wearing headsets and lifting empty glasses to their mouths as they imagined the nights they could never enjoy in the misery of the real world they inhabited. Helen's brother had been a victim of this, finally being sectioned as he failed to distinguish reality from fiction while trying to withdraw millions from his overdrawn account to upgrade his space travel pod. Algernon watched on as legislation threatened to thwart his plans before they had even come close to fruition. On the outskirts of all major 15 cities, areas divided for full living experiences flez in which everything could be provided within the confines of a 15-minute bike ride. For everything outside the radius, your handy government-monitored headset, there were illegal VR speakeasies. Places where chipped VR headsets could be rented for a hefty price to allow users to enjoy unrestricted access to the virtual world. We should go, Algernon suggested to his business partner, Aubrey. For research purposes, you know the punishments for using stuff like that. You are GovTech-listed. You will need to be wholly offline for the entire experience. That in itself will flag the system. Then if they can locate you in the wrong part of town, you know, we are trying to get investors on board, but need government approval. Any black marks against our names would slow down the process, or worse. Not sure you can say that these days. He laughed. I know, which is why Archie has got us these. He extracted 2 pairs of glasses. Aubrey had heard of these. The Shroud. They were known as in underground circles. Identity cloaks that allowed people to move about off-network for periods of 2 hours. Kind of like a high-tech Cinderella setup. You had to be back in your AppReved location list before the end of the 2-hour period or could be scuppered. They were highly illegal yet incredibly effective. Both knew it would be worth it just to try them, before they were banned. What kind of research do you have in mind? Aubrey looked at Algernon. Over what would have been his eyeglasses had myopias and the like not been cured 15 years ago. Blindness was longer an affliction, but that did not mean people saw more. Just clearer. Well, a little bit of everything. We have to know the possibilities. Yeah, but our supposed intended business plan does not really exist. What we would experience would have nothing in common with our venture. It sounds like you just want to do something naughty. Not at all. Well, maybe a little. But imagine if we can see the full potential from the criminal side, then harness that to make it work for us. I am not sure I follow. I am even less sure this is a good idea. Let's do it. They raised their broccoli and spinach cocktails in the air and downed them in one. As they readied themselves for the adventure, they uploaded temporary holograms who would stay in the office in the system's eyes. Shall we? Despite living on the cusp of success and greatness, the pair enjoyed a comfortable background. Inside the 15-minute cities, life could be more than pleasant, at least in comparison to what was on the outside. Once you got into the 30-minute regions, lawlessness was perceived as an ever-present. At least that was how the media portrayed it. Neither had had much need to leave their allotted zone. Everything they could possibly need would never be more than 15 minutes away. Outside was a mix of fantasy and folklore. Stories of deformed people with Uber-COVID who lived on a pre-reset diet. Aubrey was concerned, to the point of being scared. Algernon tried to brush it off like an everyday occurrence, but this was new to him. They donned the glasses and activated their cloak locator device. Inside, they expected the typical early century projection of a futuristic nightclub. Dark and seedy, but it resembled more of a library. Algernon knew of these because his grandfather had a photo of one in the 80s. The old man sat at a table with an actual newspaper. From time to time, he would look through these old relics, refusing to upload them, keeping the original paper format, like it was some sort of key to the past. He wondered how people could live like that, and at the same time how people could let things like that dwindle. They took their seats in what resembled a refurbished dining hall. Maybe it had been, in its day, one of the actual on-site schools that youths used to attend before knowledge implants replaced the need for education. This gave youths, the word children had not been used since the last pandemic, the opportunity to create content or amass an audience without the need of having to learn how to perform these tasks. Depending on the expenditure plan of the parents, the level of knowledge could be enhanced, though all youths in the 15-minute cities were obliged to have a certain level installed. Not that you saw many children knocking about, however you were obliged to name them. The fertility rate had fallen to below 0.5 children per marriage, yet that figure was somewhat confusing as rising costs meant some families were forced to share children, or youths. It was not unknown for a child to have as many as 5 or 6 parents. The benefits, or not, of this being the subject of major study, you would probably think, in your quaint 2023 fashion, that this would lead to all sorts of mishaps and hilarious japes with people forgetting whose turn it was to have them or pick them up. But by 2053, there are so many facilities to prevent forgetfulness. One of the most most popular being Uber's branching out into the robotic butler field, that such an event would be unthinkable. The modern world did not require for people to do their own remembering, something which people soon forgot. Algernon signed the contract with an actual pen. He was sure this retro gimmick was just for tourists but went along with it. He donned the helmet and began his experience. This was real old school tech. Some of it was from the first boom in the late 20s, when everybody feared AI and VR would take our jobs and leave us to die penniless. That didn't happen. Well, expect to the poor. But that had been the case since long before AI and VR, so they had no claims to begin blaming their predicament on advances in modern technology. There was the usual menu of debauchery and hedonism, what most people came for, of course. You also had the widows who would take an imaginary hike along a now long closed or overly contaminated coastal path. Those who would simply travel back to the mythical times of their childhood and play in parks. It takes all sorts. He thought to himself, aware of the clock. Even in this virtual world, minutes were minutes, and they had to be back in there. Do you mind if I refer to them as 15 MCs from now on? Before the 2-hour time frame was up. So, he made his choice. Inevitably, the assistant came to check whether he had selected the wrong package and offered him the UN jacuzzi, which involved sharing a hot tub with a lady from all the major races on our beloved planet. He assured him that this was what he wanted. He had no way of checking if Aubrey was playing by the rules, but assumed so, and began the immersion process. The personalitifier had been devised a few years before. Now it was banned, and allowed for AI persons to be created based on the memories a person had of another. This was particularly helpful in communicating with the dead. The main drawback being that the person wearing the headset created the version of the deceased that they wanted to have or remember, rather than how they actually might have been in real life. Algernon's idea for a last day was to take this technology while enhancing it with real memories and life experiences so that the projected person would appear warts and all. The idea of being able to create real closure was what he hoped would help him skirt around the legalities of these experiences. He saw himself in 2022, aged just 13 years and sitting in a car outside a hospital, to the north of London. He knew that his father died in the third wave of COVID-19, but the restrictions in place at the time meant that he could not say goodbye. 31 years late, he would get the chance. He had spent the previous week minstering any piece of information he could amass on his father as to create the most vivid and lifelike, even though in reality it would be deathlike, picture of the man. The start of the scene was the same as his actual memory. In the car with his mother, both wearing masks, both positive, both the only people who either one had had any contact with and who had both infected the other. They took their masks off, and she nodded to him. Algernon was impressed with technology and the tweaks that they had made to it. The split screen effect allowed him to access his actual memory alongside the new one. In the old memory, he remained in the car while his mother entered, fidgeting with the mask and wondering if he dare take it off, despite being alone. Now in the new memory, they leave the car together, masks off, walking hand in hand into the hospital. There are no restrictions as the nurse takes him to the room where his father lays connected to a ventilator. The numbers on the screen aren't good. He remembered his uncle remarking your dad needs snookers, and not understanding the comment. Now he did. He knew from his mother's memory that she watched from behind a glass shield as the life seeped out of his body. The medical staff acting like a Ryanair crew upon landing to remove the body from the bed and get it ready for the next patient who was at the door. She never got to say goodbye. She never got that last moment, and went to her grave with a wish that one day Algernon hoped to grant for so many people. Both of them sat by the bedside, his dad's favorite music playing while his father, seconds away from death, sat upright and outstretched a hand for each one to take. They talked and laughed for a good 10 minutes, and Algernon made a stunning list of promises that would largely lead to disappointment in the coming years. He kissed his dad on the forehead and bade him farewell. Look after her for me, were his father's last words to Algernon, as he left him with his mother for the final moments. The nurse took him outside and gave him ice cream. Skipping for time purposes, they next saw themselves in the car again driving to the lake where his mother and father spent their honeymoon. Too poor to jet off anywhere exotic, they set up camp in a leaky old tent that soon let the rain in. He sat with his mother next to a makeshift fire they had rustled up and they toasted marshmallows together, making a pretend toast with the soft candies as if they were raising a glass to him. Algernon's time monitor announced he was running low if he wanted to be back before the curfew. He only had one sentence left, and simply said I love you, Mum, before that old Megan drove off into the distance. Algernon removed his headset reborn. He knew what his calling was. His idea had always been his driving force, but now it became, as he checked his internal translator, his raison d'etre. They had 27 minutes to return before the cloak would reveal their true whereabouts. Of course, their Uber butler was on time, but it was not a case of telling him not to spare the horses. The traveling speed was the traveling speed and that could not be altered, not without entering the system and altering the code. That would take longer than hoping they would get back in time. It's going to be pretty tight, Algernon remarked. How was your experience? Meant to talk to you about that. Couldn't get the instructions right. Couldn't get out of the UN jacuzzi. Sorry. He tried to give him a look that would warrant pardon. Oh. So the guy who has designed one of the most complex, and I would add, illicit VR networks the world has yet to see, Can't handle a drop-down menu from a vintage system? Yeah, I was surprised too. Well, luckily for both of us, my vision remains steadfast. How are we doing for time? We are close. Even if we are 2 minutes away, what does it matter? It would matter because we would apparently travel 17 minutes in under 2, which would obviously reveal that we had not been where we claimed to have been. Have you ever considered that nobody cares? That the fear of thinking they know where you are is enough to keep you where you are so that you don't cause bother. Too many people are employed in making it a reality for your foolish theory to be true. Let's just concentrate on getting back in. Once inside, it does not matter how long it takes. The flag would only go up if we were outside. Look ahead. Border police. It's over. They were stopped on the very edge of their 15MC. Heading out, there were no checks. Only heading in. 2 officers surrounded the journeypod. The windows came down automatically and one of the officers flashed a laser at them to read their retinas. You will need to take those glasses off, sir. I cannot get a confirmation on your eye scan, the officer said, obviously having skipped the smile module of his training. We are in a dreadful hurry. Do you not think you could overlook this just once? We are part of a science project and have made a bit of a pig's ear of an experiment. It is rather embarrassing, but if you could let us pass, then we can provide you with full details inside the 15MC. Algernon was not sure whether to sound confident or stupid. He was leaning towards stupid as a means of winning the officer over. Oh well, if that is the case, then please proceed. I am dreadfully sorry to have interrupted your evening and important endeavors. He did get top marks in the sarcasm module. Nonetheless, out of the car, the other officer asked him, problems? Couple of bullshitters. They think all cops are daft. Gonna run a check. The other officer, now intrigued, began brandishing his torch that caused Algernon to consider a retro Star Wars joke that would not have gone down well. Well, what do we have here? Officer 2 had never bothered with the dynamic good cop bad cop, it would seem. However, he was savvy. Nice specs, boys. I'd say they are a prohibited CPL 593H model, and you would only be wearing those to cloak your identity. Christmas is round the corner and we could all do with a little extra. So here's the deal. You give us those nifty glasses and your driver will continue on his merry way. A trick like that will fetch a pretty price on the black market. Or of course, you can be identified and risk a privilege embargo. So, what's it to be? Aubrey and Algernon looked at each other. They would be in trouble if they lost the glasses. If we lose these glasses, we will be in trouble. Oh, you should have said. We can easily find a workaround. We can make it look like you were robbed. He placed his truncheon against Algernon's neck and gestured to Aubrey that his only move be to pass him the glasses, which he did. With the glasses safely in the police vehicle, they set about making the robbery look believable. With the cuts and bruises still fresh, Algernon made the call to the owner of the glasses, professing to be the sorriest person ever. In an unsurprising turn of events, underworld gangsters revealed themselves as being as forgiving as bent coppers. However, villains and thugs are not all idiots, and they knew well enough the kind of future Algernon's venture could offer. 20% of your profits when you are up and running, or you will see a last day you never imagined. Algernon told Aubrey about his experience and his plans to move things forward. Bloody expensive epiphany, mate. Jerry connected everything and gave a thumbs up to Norman. The most advanced technology this side of Tokyo, and they still pranced about like 2 schoolboys with stolen walkie-talkies. Ever since Jerry's wife died in very suspicious circumstances in a laboratory's fire, his life's mission had been to find the answers to the questions he was still searching for. Her life's work reduced to a click on a page that was only visible when the cursor hovered over the keyword. Jerry was loath to enter into the world of conspiracy theories. At the start, he recalled how so many people he liked, loved and respected fell victim of foolishness once the decade of the 20s took hold. He was from a science background. Like his wife Carol, he could see beyond the foolishness that laypeople dabbled with, but the fire changed him. The lack of answers changed him. And then it did not become simply a hunch. It became a driving force in his life. Before he knew it, he was attending meetings. Before he knew it, he was speaking at meetings. Before he knew it, he was chairing meetings. His life was grounded on the need to expose this fraud. His life was as over as Carol's. He realized just in time he had to get out. Yet out for him was not fully out. He managed to place sufficient distance between himself and the unsavory characters willing to camp outside Parliament with the intention of recruiting troops for the cause. He was out but still wanted to know. That was when he noticed for the first time the shy guy who rarely spoke at meetings, Norman, whose partner Raymond had also perished in a laboratory's fire. They struck up a conversation based on Jerry talking and Norman nodding or not, eventually managing sonorous utterances by the end of the first month. The details of the 2 fires were frighteningly similar, yet swiftly dismissed as terrible accidents within days of their taking place. The problem they found with trying to investigate was that in both cases, all the people involved in the experiments were dead. Jerry had kept one on companies that offered re-encounters with the dead, but was well aware that any information obtained would be wholly inadmissible due to the fact, well, you don't need a degree in law to know why. Every time they came close to finding a snippet of information that might lead them to the answers, a government vehicle was never too far away, nor was a message threatening seizure of assets. They would have to devise the means to work without being so openly visible. Norman had the talent to do this. He had always dreamed of launching a major tech company that could offer an array of products beyond people's wildest dreams. He had invented the shroud glasses. They were his baby. It was not the product that he had intended to make, just something that came to him once Raymond was no longer. What one must remember about Norman is that before all this, he was a very different person. Outgoing, affable, a lively firebrand set to take the world by storm. Before the storm that befell took his world, young Norman would dazzle banks and investors with tweaks to products to enhance their security. At night, he would offer the clandestine world of outlawed VR the chance for dreams to become virtually real. He was set for greatness, much to the chagrin of his husband, Raymond, who believed, in a rather charmingly naive way, that science should be for the greater good. Raymond had been recruited for government science initiatives whose aims were almost as big as their budgets, researching into organ resetting and blood overhauls as a means of curing cancers. Transplants were no longer needed as 90% of organs, regardless of their level of dysfunction, could be reset or rebuilt from inside the patient's body under local anesthetic. This meant that lots of terribly ill people were suddenly, this meant that lots of very rich pharma companies now had less people to sell their expensive medicines to. As a make weight in the deal, the patients were told that for their new and improved organs not to be rejected, they would need to take a series of supplements, basically placebos with a dash of vitamin C, which ensured revenue. People getting better was a major issue for government under the power of lobbyists in the 2030 and beyond. A healthy population was seen as an equal burden as an unhealthy one. Foodstuffs had had all their bad elements removed yet with no effect on taste. This meant you could wolf down a double Whopper with cheese and extra fries while only ingesting healthy minerals and the exact amount of calories you needed, though with zero fats and sugars. Imagine a world with no sick people and bans on sugar and fat. Imagine how scared the majority of the most powerful companies in the world would become. This entailed a compromise. The world could not simply cure itself. There were too many interests to take into account. Healthy yet unproductive or semi-literate people were not going to make life any easier for the rest of the world. The quandary was something that ruined more than one burgeoning political career. The new Big Macs could be made for what in our terms would be less than 50 centimes. They would sell for between 3 and 4 euros. That was the compromise. Bleed the poor. They would still pay these amounts for the products they loved, and the companies were reasonably keen on this 600% markup. Returning to Norman and Raymond, the latter could not speak about his work. Not in a, I'd better not sense. He actually could not physically do it. To work on any government project, you had to become part of their network, which involved the insertion of a chip. The main selling point of the chip when its polemic introduction was first announced, was its capacity to extract offline thoughts from the scientists that might have gone unnoticed under other circumstances. The reality was it was a means of spying on them. A series of flagged words would set off alarms in HQ which, depending on the severity, would be treated accordingly by those in power. For example, should Raymond decide to blurt out the workings of their projects, a muscle relaxant would be released via the chip that would either make his utterances indecipherable, or in more severe cases, would lead to the speaker falling into a deep sleep. As the tech progressed, even untoward thoughts could be counteracted with electric shocks to suggest the proper course of action be taken. Norman could see that Raymond was changing. He knew he was trying to learn Japanese, then ancient and dead languages as a means of putting down his side of the story, but not recording was ever unearthed. Even if Norman found one, the mere act of getting it translated would place him under the same scrutiny. He watched as Raymond's communication began to wane, meaning his did, and his never recovered, as for a long time after he was left alone, there did not seem much worth communicating. He was notified of the fire with a very blasé message. He was told to collect what had been salvaged of Raymond's belongings. Scant information was offered until it was announced that an internal investigation had unearthed that the laboratory's staff had been planning to disclose the findings of their work to the other block. Norman knew this would be nigh on impossible and waited for them to try and ensnare him as being involved in the ring. They came after him. First, Raymond was buried as a traitor to the state and his widow's pension deemed invalid. From that moment on, Norman began to spend more and more time off network, immersed in the freedom of the 30-minute plus zones, foregoing the trappings of his former life, taking on commissions for cloak and dagger artifacts. Jerry claimed he needed one of these. He didn't, as a means of getting close to Norman, though in reality, nobody was close to him. He did not allow anybody in, nor did he allow anything out. Jerry tried to win him over with the story of his own tragic misfortune, but that only raised a nod. There was a brief moment when there may have been a smile, but nothing else came of it. Jerry took the lead in conversations. Had he not, there would have been none, and over time, an unlikely alliance was formed. Norman had devised a way to work undetected, but they still needed someone to enhance the technology to bring the dead back to life and for them to talk. 7 large screens covered the wall, with another 2 on the table, not to mention the handheld projectors that could also offer information. One spent all its time following the whereabouts of Algernon and Aubrey, but the pair were aware of other players in the market too. They noticed the difference with A and A being that they did not actively try to hide what they were doing. Their intentions seemed genuinely good, which they did not whether to view as a cause for concern or not. I think it is time to remove surveillance from other sources. If anyone is going to move forwards on this, it is them. Do you agree? Norman nodded and began shutting down other screens. Remember when we thought it might be hugely interesting to detail the path the company took and outline all those teething difficulties that would have dragged the story on with no real direction? I remember you thought that. Well, precisely. Suffice to say that despite the teething difficulties, they have only ballywell gone and got government approval against all the odds and can now develop their program. It's almost too good to be true. You've come a long way. Partly down to me, would you say? You'd certainly like to think so. In all seriousness, this is now the most delicate part of the operation. Nobody can know what we even think from now on. If anything, you may need to be less chatty than before. I assume that will not be an issue for you. A simple nod proved enough. Of all the screens previously active, only one remained in view as the theme music to a well-known news show could be heard. The perfect hair and even more perfect teeth of the presenter bore all the hallmarks of prime time viewing. Little had changed in the broadcasting world. People's tastes may have seemed more sophisticated, but the reality showed little progress in terms of product. However, tonight's guest offered a sizable amount for personal interest for Jerry and Norman, as it was none other than the founder. Well, one of them, but the one who got the most credit of their most closely followed venture, A Last Day. Both of them knew the inner workings of the company probably better than the actual founders, but deemed it worthy of a pot of regenerated ice cream and the comfy sofa. They even hooked up the 4D printer to make popcorn. Tonight, good citizens of the 15MC TV scope, we are proud to offer you an exclusive insight into the mindset of a state member who may well become one of the standout members of this or indeed any decade. Please show your appreciation for the one and only Algernon River Sandal. The audience erupt in rapturous applause and Algernon enters the set. Mr. River Sandal. Algernon. Please, Algernon, you seem to be the name on everybody's lips at the moment, but your company is far from an overnight sensation. Maybe you could begin by giving us a bit of background. I'd be delighted to. You see, this project dates back to a significant day in my life. A day in which I was prevented from saying goodbye to my father and forced to bear the burden of grief and failure to close matters throughout the rest of my childhood and into what would once have been considered the cusp of middle age. Hard to believe that now. Well, yes. We have prepared this short video which I feel will explain our vision and allow your viewers to comprehend the sincerity of our intentions. Algernon nods to the technical staff who use their skills to press play. The scene is overly dramatic. Aubrey hated it from the start. He said it was everything he did not want the company to represent. He called it gimmick-laden, but it was the pitch that would win over the government staff. A small boy wanders through a forest, lost, calling out daddy as he tries to keep up with a makeshift cortege on a hospital bed, a priest reading from the Bible and dousing the body in incense. As much as the boy tried, he could not keep pace and the group began to depart from his field of vision. Eventually, he catches up, but there is just a hospital bed with tubes and wires hanging towards the floor. The machine beeped but was not connected to anything. After a few seconds, a nurse entered and told him he could not be there. We see the boy traipse off back into the forest slowly and a caption appears on the screen bearing the legend, "This is how it used to be." Light comes to the screen and the words are replaced with "Not any longer. You can now have a last day." The same boy frolics with his father, now seemingly cured of any ailments, and tells him that he loves him and will always be a good boy. The nurses appear in a line to form a choir to sign the song specially penned for the event by the renowned AI composer OS31. The music is uplifting as the boy and his father walk towards the light and, once there, the father pats him on the head and walks towards the light. The boy stands at the entrance, waving. A final caption appears, "Tell them you love them." On a last day, somewhere far away, Norman looked at Jerry and burst into laughter. "That is the cheesiest thing I have ever seen," Norman said, unusually. "It's almost like they are deliberately avoiding lengthy and plausible explanations regarding the science involved, as if it were directed at people from when his dad died who would never understand the complexities of such a system. As if they expect the viewers to simply accept that it works and it is possible because it is the future. A rather cynical take, wouldn't you say? Anyway, the interview is about to start. Well, I would have to say that when something seems too good to be true, it often is. I don't think everybody will be taken in by that sugar-coated full closure routine. Do you not think it is somewhat insulting to the intelligence of our viewers to put out a spot like that? The presenter, who seemed hand-picked as not to rock the boat, seemed intent on doing just that before a proper question had been asked. Well, I would have to say that striving for perfection and attaining it has perhaps affected my view of A Last Day and its possibilities. What you have seen is possible, but within reason. This is why I am here today, to be clear about what can and cannot be done. For example, if you had a longing desire to tell Mozart what you felt about him, that would not work. Because he was deaf. The audience laughed and Algernon suddenly felt on the back foot. Hilarious. Yeah. For example, what I mean is we can't realistically create the possibility for people to travel back to any time and spend time with anybody, whether they were relevant to know them. They have to be people from what we have termed the SOC Medco. That is the social media cutoff. This allows us to create a genuine likeness of the person based on their personality, not just the information the person wishing to communicate gives us. What must be borne in mind is that our perception of the dead is not always objective. We can often lose sight of their real personality as we are consumed by the need to say goodbye or undo a mistruth regarding something that happened during their lifetime. These events can become distorted over time, the living person's anguish at not being able to convey their message leading to an altered reality. Our candidates are vetted so that we can obtain extra information. All this gameplay with devices is available all over the place if you look hard enough. Ah yes, I was hoping you would mention the clandestine version of your project. Is it not true that part of your inspiration came from an unauthorized visit to one of these such centers? Did you not bribe the police to keep this information under wraps? Of course. What it seems you do not know is that the police officer still performed the check and sent a copy of the report to our offices this morning. The presenter's aim was unveiled. The aim of making Algernon look like a chancer and then unmasking him as a user of illegal products. This was meant to bring him down, but had the effect of testing his patience more. You think I swept that under the carpet? Myself and Aubrey, my business partner, debriefed our superiors the following Monday. We talked about it over the weekend and knew that we could not expect the cop not to mention it, and that it would have been a living hell to do so. So, we came clean. It had been a discovery. Yes, it had been done in a way that perhaps contravened directives, but we felt it was worth taking the punishment for. Can we share life logs? The presenter nodded and Algernon displayed his criminal record for all to see. There was the misdemeanor and the punishment. 1 year's loss of oral leisure credit. He just remembered that old movie about the jailbreak and had Mozart live in his head for a year. Aubrey found it harder. In fact, being honest about it helped us get a foot in the door, so to speak. Nothing remains a secret in this game for long. No cloak ever truly works. Being first is not always a guarantee. There is no copyright for unlicensed materials. We just had something that others seemed to lack. We genuinely believed in the project. I don't know why I have used the past there. I still do. We still do. More than the value of the government commission. The presenter had not expected this turnaround. He was losing the floor. Would you expect anyone to ask you if you do this job for the money? Of course. It is a factor. We have to eat. We have to live. But I can assure you with the skills we both have, we could have invented something else. Something more selfish. And made much more money. However, if you expect us to die penniless for our art, you are sadly mistaken. Still, I can understand your audience's reticence to believe my words. Why should they? What have I done to prove myself right? Come on here and say it works. Anyone can do that. To prove that we are genuine. When we go live, with our first journey into the past, the entire process will be streamed so that every aspect can be observed. We have no idea whether it will be a success. We have done trials but never a full regression. Maybe it will be professional suicide. Maybe it will be the biggest mistake of our lives. But if it does not work, it never will. So there is no point in continuing. Unless we plan to shaft you. We will begin the broadcast on Saturday at 1800. The living participant is a man whose family begged him to stop the car to savor the stunning views over the cliffs. However, just as they were approaching their destination, the heavens opened and the mother in the back with 2 young twins also in the car, decided to stay in the warmth and allow the husband to take the photo. Unbeknown to the father, he parked on a slope and failed to apply the handbrake. As he adjusted the focus on his camera, he saw the vehicle slide down to the cliff's edge, doing everything he could to reach it. He tried to mouth to his 11-year-old son in the front seat handbrake but to no avail. He watched with impotence as the car slid off the cliff into the sea. He survived but from that day on stopped living. No amount of psychiatry or medicines can ever heal the wounds caused by failing to perform that simple action. 4 lives taken needlessly, 1 forced to continue without any need for existence. Every day since, it has been possible for him to forget. Every song he hears, every advert, every innocuous product in the supermarket, remind him of what he didn't do and what the consequences were. Will this release give him happiness? Of course not. There is naivety at play here. The very next day, he will continue his life sentence. He does not want your pity. He is not in prison, but invisible bars surround him 24 hours a day. In his sleep, his mind replays those events, or in crueler moments, erases them to leave him drained, waking up to reach over to her side, the empty side. His waking life is no better. How do you get up in the morning and go to work on a Monday and engage in small talk about the weekend? How was your weekend? Oh, quiet. Accidentally murdered the family. Everybody still whispers every time he leaves the house. The modern world means that wherever he goes, anonymity is impossible. Sure, he could change his appearance and start again, but the system knows it is him. Even if he had an illegal retina transplant, he could only assume the identity of the previous owner. Creating a new identity is the plaything of only the very rich, which is why he has nothing to hide and nothing to lose. That is his advantage. You could not take any more from him than he has already lost. Plus, when you add to that the guilt factor, so, Free publicity for you and some titillation. I thought you were a serious company. You can do better than this. I'm sure your viewers will tune in regardless. Ready, Aubrey asked. Algernon signaled that he was. There is no need, once again, to enter into the details of this complex process. The literature has been available at the usual sources for some time now, which means we assume anyone who has held any interest in the whys and wherefores of the science will have done so now. For legal reasons, we are required to have video evidence of our subject's volition to engage in this venture and provide his consent for the same. We will also take the timely measures of reiterating the possible side effects and, indeed, failure to achieve the goal set forth in this experiment. We would also mention to the viewers that this for us is, to use a rather badly worded phrase, do or die. If this experiment does not provide a satisfactory result, by that we mean for the subject, not for us, then we will be forced to accept that it will not work for anyone. Billy, are you fully aware of what you are embarking upon? I am. Have you been properly briefed as to what the above entails and the possible outcomes? I have. Are you aware that this experience will be generated based on real memories, but that in real terms it is not an actual experience? I am. Are you willing to assume the risks that journey involves and further science? Try and stop me. Would you like to address the audience when the deed is done? Thank you, Billy. The journey you will take will be the first steps to heal many hearts. We know you will never feel the same as you did before the accident, but maybe the rest of your time will be seen in a different light. Here is your helmet. Billy put the helmet on, and the screen was divided into segments. One part showed Billy's actual memory of the event, drawn from hypnosis sessions in which the memory was pictorially graphed onto miniatures. The second provided an introduction to the deceased based on the memories ascertained from Billy, but contrasted with the grandparents, friends of his wife, friends of the kids, teachers, anyone who information could be extracted from, so that the twins, his 9-year-old daughter Belle and his wife Hope, could spend a last day with him in the most realistic fashion. Billy had chosen the backdrop, 2 days before the incident, a nothing day, the kind of day you would never even consider as special, the kind of day in which the things you do are almost mundane, almost throwaway, their meaning intrinsically meaningless, until they are thrown away. Billy did not want to spend a last day kayaking in the Grand Canyon, climbing Everest, or singing La Traviata in La Scala. He wanted to take the twins to nursery, bow leg spin to his daughter Belle, maybe get her out LBW just to let her know that in the afterlife he could still find the rough. He wanted to have with his wife a lucky Thursday, as they called them. The twins were at the nursery until 6 and Belle had cricket training, depending on the weather. This meant they both got home around 1 and treated themselves to a nice lunch, a bottle of wine, a movie, and a brief moment of them remembering when they had a very different life. A life they often complained about, a life that hurt them and left them sapped of energy, but a life that Billy viewed as nothing short of perfection from his current perspective. The viewers noted the timeless nature of the opening scene. The hallmarks of 2053 were there, but placed to the background. They could see that so many aspects of modern life had actually not changed that much, however much technology you could add to your life. People still slept in beds and pooed in toilets. Billy and his wife Hope slept with their mouths opened as the camera moved away from their establishing shot to reveal a twin in Hope's arms. Despite not being awake, only the child gave off an essence of having had any amount of rest. The alarm sounded and made the two adults wonder exactly where they were before realizing that they had survived another night of teething. Only having one twin in the bed was seen as a minor victory. Coffee? If I could turn my neck, I'd blow you. Billy got up and adjusted his pajama bottoms, wondering whether it was truly necessary to open both eyes. He gave a rap on Belle's door but knew it would need 4 or 5 more intense attempts to get her horizontal. Hope had hoped that her boobs would live to see another day and decided early doors that the twins would be bottle fed. If that would cause them to fail history GCSE the day, then so be it. She was not going to have the pair of them bite her nipples off for almost a year. Billy was now an expert in preparing the bottles, and the 20 minutes in which Hope wandered from the noise of the alarm to the sound of the teacup being placed on the bedside table were, selfishly, the happiest of her days. She felt guilty about enjoying those moments, especially when the conversations meander towards the competitive mums at the school gates. Hair and makeup impeccable. Daughters with plaits finished off with ribbons adhering to the school colors, and then her Belle, helping the other kids remember the word unkempt. There was never enough time. Everything was a rush, but she could not admit. Just force a smile through those teeth which she could not remember if she had brushed them or not. Billy may have lost his mind, but he was still able to think sensibly. He chose Saturday for his last day. This phrase now inevitably appeared with the copyright sign next to it. Realizing the idea of having this opportunity and going to his old job would have been folly, Billy was handpicked for this project. The pricing scheme did not envisage a pro bono format, and Billy's post-accident financial situation did not allow him to enjoy any luxuries. It was good marketing, in many ways a win-win situation. For Algernon and Aubrey obviously. Billy had already lost. Aubrey signaled to the director to cut the actual memory scene as it was deemed unnecessary. Everybody knew the story and it was detracting from what they were actually trying to do. When the simplest things in life are taken from you, is when you realize how much you need them. Billy could have started a new life. Said oh well, these things happen, and was young enough to embark upon a second family while carrying a post-it around with him that just said handbrake. Some people are capable of exorcising trauma from their minds, capable of living a double life with their hidden secret tucked away to only haunt them when the demons were allowed out to play. Billy was unable to do any of that. Indeed, he made the choice not to dishonor their memories by suggesting they were replaceable. He went to the obligatory therapy courses in prison for involuntary manslaughter, but had attained a sort of inner peace. He expected nothing more from life as he felt he deserved nothing. Life was more than happy to respond to this request. He thought about taking his own life. He had found himself in the bathroom with a razor blade. He had found himself in the garage with a robe. He had wondered about just letting the steering wheel veer to the left into oncoming traffic, but he knew that the latter approach would at best ruin someone else's life. At worst end it. Someone would have to break the door down and find him. Someone would have to have a perfectly normal day ruined by finding the corpse of the murderer. He made the decision never to give anybody else nightmares as long as he remained undead. One of the challenges for the program was handling the response of the participant. When they were told what they could do, it all seemed too good to be true. But in the cold reality of the experience, it would be hard not to be overwhelmed by the situation. The obvious choice would be a sedative, but then, they argued, the true nature of the experience would be undermined. Billy had been coached to control his emotions, while continually remembering where he was and what the purpose of the experiment was. Belle had a cricket match that day. She was only 9 but already in the under-11s and showing a certain amount of mastery in the forward defensive shot. Anything short of a length would be mercilessly flicked off the pad's down leg side. There was talk. When she was older, there was talk that she could go a long way. Billy was no slouch in his youth and had even taken in a fair few test matches in his bachelor days. This was the first time he had seen a ball bowled since that day. They sat at a picnic table as Hope extracted a thermos flask of coffee. A perk of the system was the ability to choose the weather. Billy opted for a pleasant day. Not overly hot. A nice breeze. Genuinely clement. Indeed, every time he heard the patter of rain, it was another reminder that had the weather been better that day, nobody would ever have heard of him. They may have only lost the car. Atonement comes in many shapes and forms. A&A were aware that perhaps in the future there would be takers who do not want idyllic nibbles on a gingham tablecloth and need their visitor to give them the full lash of the tongue. There was no real point in, to use cricketing argot, setting a field for these sorts of shots until they had the final word from the selectors. Billy had planned the day down to the last detail but had failed to take a significant factor into account. This was not a movie he was directing. This was not his script. He, along with other people, had provided the information to return, ever so briefly, his loved ones to life. But once all the factors were in play, there was no genuine reason for things to unravel as Billy wished. For the meantime, they enjoyed the moment. Belle came into bat. Every time Billy tried to mouth an apology, she stopped him in his tracks. It was her way of letting him know she knew. He wondered if he was cheating. He was reassured immediately by the team that this would be her most likely reaction, even after what he had done, albeit unwittingly. She was loath to admonish him. Somehow that did not make him feel better. In his mind, Belle would hit a few boundaries and they would go wherever she wanted for lunch. It would not be his number one choice, but he realized early on this day was not about him. One of the twins started coughing. We'll have to get some Calpol on the way to lunch. I brought some. That's your dad, kids. Always thinking. She meant it as a compliment, but it hurt. It only hurt because he knew it wasn't true. Did the creation before him know what he had done? How could she? Before he could ponder the issue more, there was a scream of pain from the crease, chasing a single that maybe wasn't there. Belle went over on her ankle. Retired hurt was noted. Lunch would have to wait. This reality was beginning to prove to be just that. They bundled her into the car, Billy realizing for the first time that it was the car, and took her to A&E. While waiting for Tirage, he got her a packet of crisps and a juice. This pain is worse than death. Her mother laughed at this hyperbolic utterance. It knocked Billy for 6. The nurse appeared again and while profusely apologetic, informed them that the doctor on duty had been called upon to perform an emergency operation and they would be in for a wait. A message appeared inside Billy's helmet asking if he wanted to reconfigure the day or fast forward until she had been seen by the doctor. He set the helmet to do not disturb and they continued with their day. They finally got to the pizza place they used to go to before returning to the park. Belle's limp meaning playing activities were limited. What a lot of people discovered at that point was that the term A last day did not entail a period of 24 hours. After about 8, memories would become inconsistent and unreliable, meaning the visitors would be recalled as the session came to an end. Billy and Hope sat on the park bench as the sun started to go down. She leaned against him and he put his arms around her to keep her warm. The twins slept soundly in the dual buggy as Belle tried to practice a cricket shot with an imaginary bat. Despite the pain, it all happened so fast. By the time we were falling, there was almost no time to react. Not that reacting would have changed anything. Do I forgive you? Well, that I am afraid remains beyond me. I did not want to die as much as you did not want to kill me. I mean us. I am sure you are repentant, but that won't bring us back. I guess time makes you a trifle blasé and you could think these things happen. But it happened to me. I cannot begin to imagine what your life has been like since that moment. But I would wager it beats being dead. I'd say that's a reasonable stance. So, what now? I'd like to help people, I guess. Maybe what I have learned will be useful for them. Maybe it will give me a purpose. If I were alive, I'd hate myself for saying this. But you've punished yourself enough. You're no use to anyone moping around like that. Make your time count. For me, and for these three. Anyway, time's time. They stood up and walked to the park entrance together. He kissed the twins and gave Belle a hug. He kissed Hope one last time and realized for the first time in years, he had some again. She pushed the pram to the car and Belle hobbled behind them. After making sure they were belted in, they waved one more time and drove off towards the light. Billy tried to exit the park too, but he was pushed back. Returning to the bench, he took off the helmet. The